across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in the first hour here talking about education, and that's really appropriate. We're coming to the end of the summer. I know, collective sigh and all the rest, but your kids or grandkids are going to be heading back to school, so we're going to be talking about education this first hour, and really, in a sense, talking first about some of the problems with education today, and then the solutions. And we're going to have a great conversation. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones if you have some comments or questions. We bring back to the microphone in studio with us today, so you can watch it on our livecast if you'd like to do so. Jody Capehart, who is currently the head of school of a new Christian and classical school in Prosper, Texas, called Grace Academy of North Texas. If you've listened to the program with her before, you know that she has started many schools. I might mention one 40 years ago, which is hard to believe. You were 5 at the time, I know, but the Grace Bible Church did the Grace Academy, and so that was 40 years ago. Also, Legacy Christian Academy. She is known oftentimes as the school whisperer. We have some information, matter of fact, 2 articles today having to do with Common Core and some others that you would find at our website, as well as you go to the website for jodycapehart.com. We have that link as well. And so we're going to try to cover this issue of education, talk about some of the problems, but also what we know actually works and how we should apply a biblical point of view to education. So, Jody, great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here, Kerby. Thank you so much.
You know, I mentioned Common Core, and there's some people that just simply say, well, I don't have any kids or grandkids in the public schools, so there's no reason to be concerned about that issue. And I've noticed we don't get a lot of phone calls because I think a lot of people say, well, my state doesn't have Common Core, or my kids aren't in public school, so I don't really care. That's why I published your first article here, the real power behind Common Core, because you point out that it may be true that Common Core is not in your Christian school or in your homeschool facility that you have or in your home, but the reality is anybody that's going to go to college has to go through the SAT, the PSAT, the ACT, whatever it might be, and that's linked to the Common Core. So in a sense, every piece of education today is being influenced in one way or another by Common Core, are they not?
It is, especially with the SAT, and because it is directly linked, because the College Board has adopted the Common Core. And so I think as evidence in the Dallas Morning News on July 19th, the article about the AP history exam and resistance to that, which I certainly support, because if you look at that exam, that is direct evidence of the impact of the Common Core, because it does not test or teach basic principles that are important as part of our U.S. history, and also talks about the negative aspects of capitalism rather than the positives.
Sure.
So it is right at our door, whether we want to acknowledge it or not.
So again, if people get a book or a curriculum, it doesn't say approved by Common Core, but the reality is that's really what's happening right now.
Well, and let me illustrate something for you, is that we use a certain math book, and the reason we chose it several years ago is because it has websites that are embedded with help or challenges for students. And so as the school grew and we needed additional textbooks, lo and behold, when new ones came in at midterm last year, on the front it said Common Core.
Wow.
And of course everyone freaked out. And so we quickly looked at it, and it was exactly the same as the others. But why did it say Common Core? Because they want to sell the textbook.
Sure.
Because it's national. And so with 45 states adopting Common Core, so then we began to do further research, and we looked in it, and just to give you an example, so there was a lesson in the book on estimating, which you and I, when we went to school, we all need to estimate. If a child has $20 and they go into Target or they're going to go out to eat, and they have to think, well, how far is this $20 going to go? They need to estimate in their mind. That is a basic mathematical principle.
Right.
But because there's been all this stuff about fuzzy math with Common Core and so on, a parent sent a note with their child's homework and said, my child will not do this assignment because it's Common Core.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, this is not. This is a concept your child has to do. But it began to take up a lot of our time trying to defend it when indeed it was not a Common Core. So, but are we sensitive to looking for evidence of it? Of course, because but this is a math book that we are going to stay with, and unless, of course, they begin to change it.
Yeah.
And so it is there. The history, of course, we talked about. Now we don't teach that, but now if we want our kids to take the AP exam in history, no,
Yeah.
we don't want to teach. We don't want to send our teachers to that training if that's the weak history that's going to be taught.
Yeah.
We would rather have a concurrent course in history, and so it is, and so it's showing up.
And I think it's really important for those of you that are parents or grandparents that have kids in any kind of school situation. Certainly right now, because it is still summer, I suspect there are a fair number of teachers listening, headmasters, principals, and others to really think about this. And we've documented quite a bit of the concern you mentioned too. I mean, people obviously could see how you could get a real bias in history. And you, in your articles here, give some great examples. I'll just pick one real simple, and that is you're led to believe that the tearing down of the Berlin Wall was Gorbachev's idea rather than Ronald Reagan's idea. Okay, I can go through lots and lots of history examples, but I think it would surprise, Jody, a lot of people that you can even get Common Core ideas in something like mathematics, because everybody simply says, wait a minute, 2 + 2 = 4. It always does. But the way in which they teach that sometimes is of question, and that's why individuals have had concerns, even the way in which Common Core is trying to teach people, young people, how to learn and to do math.
That's very true. And I think that all math teachers will tell you that for a child to be successful in math, as they go up in the grades, they have to know their math facts.
Right.
And if you look at developmentally how children learn, they can learn their math facts so much quicker when they're little.
Yeah.
And so when you can chant them and sing them and do all these things when they're young, then when they get to fractions and mixed denominators and all of that, and laying the foundation for algebra, they need to know that quickly.
Right.
So if they didn't have to learn it, which is the way it is now, and so that, I think that's one of the problems. And then another problem, these convoluted word problems.
I know, some of them, you can't figure out what is the answer. And I was pretty good at math, by the way. So I look at some of these and go, I don't know what the answer is.
Yes.
Or how you figure these out.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a brother with a PhD in math who's been a math professor for 40 years. I have 2 sons with math degrees, and one in actuary and one a CPA. And we look at this and go, huh?
Yeah.
But
Something's wrong.
that's the problem. So you have kids who were experiencing success in math, and then they encounter these word problems, and they're just falling apart because it's no longer a straight math computation. It's all wrapped up in this who knows what. And you're so wrapped up in this storyline that has nothing to do with the math that you forget what is the issue here.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, continue our conversation today with Jody Capehart, and we will spend a little more time on Common Core, but I don't want to keep talking all day about the problems, because in some respects this surfaces what we do know works in terms of developmental skills, learning modalities, and things of that nature. And so certainly if you'd like to join our conversation a little bit later, we're going to talk about the positive aspects of education, but we do want to get into 1 or 2 other questions that have surfaced in this area of Common Core and how that is not only just affecting the public schools, but the private schools, the Christian schools, and frankly, even shows up perhaps eventually in the homeschool curriculum. So we want you to know a little bit more about these issues, and we'll come back and talk about the way in which young people learn, the importance of character, all that coming up right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Will Christianity hold up in court? Trial lawyer Mark Lanier answers that question in his book, Christianity on Trial, A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith. He has 3 decades of experience as a lawyer, but also has college training in biblical languages. In the book, he brings his biblical expertise and his legal background to bear on some of the foundational apologetic questions concerning Christianity. He makes an opening statement similar to one that he would make in a court of law. He argues that we, the jury, should use our common sense in evaluating the statements of the witnesses and the claims of the experts. He also reminds us that we are evaluating evidence like we would in a courtroom. What is the evidence for the proposition? What is the evidence against it? He then takes us through many of the fundamental questions believers and skeptics have about the Christian faith. In each case, he calls witnesses to address those questions. For the existence of a God or no God, he calls to the stand such luminaries as G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis. In order to explain the biblical view of God, we hear from the psalmist, St. Paul and John the Apostle. He also addresses two important issues in our world today, truth and morality. We unfortunately live in a postmodern world that denies the existence of absolute truth. That is why he calls witnesses like Plato, Descartes, St. Paul, Anselm of Canterbury, and Augustine. We also live in a world that is full of moral relativism. That is why he also writes about right and wrong and the moral God, and his witnesses here include Charles Darwin, Herbert Spencer, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Adolf Hitler. He concludes with the resurrection. Lawyers like Frank Morrison, who wrote the book Who Moved the Stone, have found the evidence for the resurrection to be compelling when examined in the same way they examine evidence in a courtroom. If you know a lawyer who is skeptical about Christianity, this might be a book you could pass on to him or her. They will find that the claims of Christianity can indeed hold up in court. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Education is our topic today, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jody Capehart with us today, head of a new school that she has been starting and has actually been a part of, the Grace Academy of North Texas, going back to some of the other schools, Prestonwood Christian Academy, Legacy Christian Academy, and going all the way back to 1974, Grace Academy, 40 years of experience, author of so many different books, and certainly if you are interested in education, and she has written on so many different things, cherishing and challenging your children, becoming a treasured teacher, as well as talking about things like ADD children, and all sorts of topics are available on her website, and we have links to that, and you can follow it by going to our website, pointofview.net. A couple of articles we've posted. One, the real power behind the Common Core. Another one I want to point people to is the common sense case against Common Core, which is really based in a large part on the book by Terrence Moore. But I mean, you talk about such things as incorrect information about the founders, the Constitution is evolving, science presents evolution as truth, some historical facts and figures. I guess the obvious question, Jody, is where did this come from? I mean, this is certainly a controversial issue, and I think there is a tendency for a lot of our listeners to think, well, I'm in a state that doesn't have Common Core. Well, I think we've already pointed out, I don't care if you are or you aren't, this is having an influence in all of education. Where did it come from?
It truly is. I think, and this is just my opinion, is that it originated, a book I read that just really impacted me was The Smartest Children in the World and How They Got There by Amanda Ripley. And it looked at the countries, because if you look at the PISA, the international exam, and of course the United States doesn't do very well on that.
No, it doesn't.
And of course, educators just go crazy that we don't do well on that. And then when countries like Finland and South Korea and so on do so well, why? How? Yeah. And so I think looking at that and what the people that came up with the Common Core thought, well, we need to be prepared. We keep hearing the same things for the 21st century world and critical thinking skills and college bound and so on. That is what they looked at. Now, I looked at it totally differently, okay? And because when I read that, and I took our kids in the logic and rhetoric school, that would be middle school and high school, and if you look at the kids in Finland, South Korea, and Poland, and these countries that did so well, they came at it in a totally different way. And yet there were common denominators, but I wanted the kids to figure that out. So I said, okay, you prepare for this exam the way they did in Finland. You do it like South Korea and so on. And then you come back and share with the group how you prepared for the exam. And then we share common characteristics. And so we put the common characteristics on the board, and lo and behold, these are some that the kids came up with. They chose to make education their top priority. Mm-hmm. The kids did, but so did the country. For example, I'll just show this real quick, which I think is fascinating. South Korea, they even stopped the airplanes going over during the exams.
Wow.
Taxis are available for all kids to be able to get to school. I mean, it is the number one priority of the country.
Impressive.
And one thing that I love, and this could be a whole show, but we won't go there right now, is that parents support teachers.
There you go.
Okay, separate topic. Okay.
Yes.
They were very conscientious. The kids were committed to studying. They cared. They had self-control. So I said, what is the canopy over this? What is the character?
Character.
So we'll come back to that.
Yes.
So,
character.
So what I got out of that book is that there was a real sense of character developing in these students. That and lo and behold, these countries don't put sports. They don't elevate sports over education. And lo and behold, we do. And then I read another book, How Children Succeed, and all this money being thrown at education to help schools to become better. And yet one thing that kept surfacing that people didn't want to look at because it seemed too warm fuzzy, character.
Character.
Ooh.
Don't want to talk about
character.
that.
Nobody wants to talk about that. Right.
Yeah.
It's got to be these great labs. It's got to be this great curriculum. It's got to be this. But character?
Yeah.
And so character is one of those words that complicates any conversation because it means different things to different people. And so it goes into that. And then one thing I think I might have even shared this before, but that great marshmallow test that was done at Stanford. And it's so great.
Let's tell that again,
okay, all right.
It's a great story.
So it truly is, and it seems so simplistic, and yet when it's replicated, lo and behold, it's still true. But when they put out marshmallows with little children, 4 and 5 years old, and then the tester went out of the room for a minute and said, if you have to eat it, you may, but if you wait until I come back, then you may have 2. And so the children that were able to wait, i.e. delay gratification, then they were children that fast forward to later years when they took the SAT, scored on average 21 points higher.
Isn't that amazing?
That's extraordinary. And so the point is that delayed gratification, guess what? That is a character trait.
It is character,
and that is something that our kids in America don't have. I want what I want when I want it. And if you won't give it to me, I'll make sure mom and dad come in and make sure that you give it to me. Okay? So, and so again, all this research and all these books, what I heard loud and clear is it has to do with character.
Yes.
But what the Common Core people got out of it is that it has to do with these 21st century schools. I mean, preparing for 21st century.
Yeah.
Now, then that brings me to the next, which is looking at how children learn and what do we need in these schools. Mm-hmm. So if somebody had asked me what schools need, and believe it or not, no one did, but I would have said, let's go back to what worked.
Yes, how young people learn at certain ages, yes.
And so we can look at developmental needs, and I think, let me just quote a few of our favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton. Mm-hmm. Every revolution is a restoration, recapturing and reintroducing that which inspired and guided us in the past. And C.S. Lewis, when we have lost our way, the quickest way to go forward is to go home. And all of Douglas Wilson's books help us to recover the lost tools of learning. And so we look at, when was education excellent? And so I quote something from Terrence Moore's book, and 1789, here's a selection from the Massachusetts School Law. And I'll just paraphrase a little here, but whereas the Constitution of this Commonwealth has declared, that that every town or district shall be provided with a schoolmaster or schoolmasters of good morals to teach children to read and write, to instruct them in the English language as well as arithmetic and decent behavior, and it goes down, shall be provided with a grammar schoolmaster of good morals and be instructed in Latin, Greek, and English languages.
Wow, sounds like classical Christian education, doesn't it?
Sounds like classical education. So we go back, and so as I reflected on this, I thought the Common Core miss the whole point. There's no character
Yeah.
involved. And the second thing is that if you look at classical education, and I look at the Latin word educare, and first you have to preserve the past.
Yes.
And they're not preserving the past.
Yeah. They're ignoring it
They're
mostly.
ignoring the past.
Or rewriting it in some cases.
And they're
yeah.
rewriting
Yeah.
it, right. And they're preparing for the future. But I believe that in order to prepare students for the future, you first have to preserve the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that's teaching history correctly. And that's teaching them good literature, good art, good music, the wealth. And so Common Core will say, well, we have history and literature and in there. No, they have little excerpts. And then the questions that the teachers are given to guide the discussions, that's where the insidious part of Common Core comes in.
Yeah.
Because it's guiding their minds a certain way, and that's where the bias comes in. And that's a lack of character.
We're going to take a break in just a minute, but before we do, and let me give you a chance to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's kind of also put one more thing on the table, and that is we've learned a lot more about how young people learn, what's called the trivium. And at the very young ages, they love to memorize facts, but later on, they like to debate. And so there are some really important principles that we've learned through centuries, even now millennia, that are being violated by Common Core. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about that.
We're going to do that and also give you a chance to join our conversation today. Let me mention that we've put on the table here a couple of resources that I think you're going to find very helpful. Number one is The Real Power Behind Common Core. This is a resource that I think would be helpful to you, simply to help you understand that you aren't really exempt from the influence of Common Core if you happen to be right now living in a state that does not have actually adopted Common Core. You are free of its influence if your children or grandchildren go to a Christian school, or even if you're homeschooling your kids. That is having an influence. And this piece by Jody Capehart, the first article that we have there, I think would really help make that case. Then she's done, I think, a very good job of briefly summarizing that book by Terrence Moore, which is really good. The Story Killers, a Common Case Against the Common Core, which, if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, is available. And then a little bit later, we're going to be talking about why classical education, what that actually entails. And so all of that is available at the website, pointofview.net. And we also have a link to her website. Let me just mention, as we're going to a break, we also sent out an email. This latest Outlook magazine has to do with some things that are showing up in the public schools, and that is all the transgender information. And right now we have same-sex marriage, which is legal in 19 states and the District of Columbia. And that means about 43% of Americans live in a state that has already legalized same-sex marriage. Well, now you've got the whole push for the transgender issue. So let me first of all encourage you to read the appeal letter that has been going out under my name, as well as the most recent Outlook articles on that. And we have a place on the website called Blurred Lines to give you a chance to find out a little bit more and to donate to this ministry. We'll talk more about that and take some of your phone calls right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation in studio today with Jody Capehart. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about Common Core. We're going to move on to classical Christian education. But before we do, I just wanted to take one phone call that was focused on that issue of Common Core. So we'll go to Georgia first, the Good News Network. Tony, thank you for calling today.
I appreciate you taking my call, Kerby. I was just expecting to your call screener. Here in Augusta, we're actually getting the commercials. Because these seem to be, they look like they're teachers, and that commercial seems like they're so real what they're saying, and they're saying that, you got people that are against Common Core, and they're saying that, how good Common Core is going to be for educating our kids and whatever. It's like we're being overwhelmed with a lot of what's coming out this administration.
It's going to be a real campaign. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I'm telling you. And Common Core is definitely one of them that they're just, I've seen the commercial on numerous occasions lately. And like I was just, just wondering, what do we do about that? Especially where these commercials can seem so convincing, especially when they're using the teachers the way they use them. And they're all female teachers. Well, no male. That was the other thing. Because, women can be very convincing,
Yeah. Well, again, these commercials are starting to surface. Jody, your comments.
I love that you asked that. I think that is a great question. And the We Will Not Conform
right.
that's showing up in the theaters with Glenn Beck, Michelle Malkin, and David Barton, I think that's a must. But I, as an example, to support your point, is that Sarah Brown Wesleyan, who was Teacher of the Year in 2010, very endearing person, and she has the Sarah's Teaching Channel. And so she, again, is one that you listen to, and then you listen to the points and each of the things that I would say we believe, and you hear it addressed, and then the answer, and you're like, oh, well, that sounded convincing.
Yeah. And
I think that's what's happening right now. And unless a person goes deeper and you read between the lines, and that's what most people don't do. They don't have the time or to go and say, wait, I need to go a little bit deeper here. And I think something I mentioned earlier is someone will say, well, but the classics aren't being taught, or good literature. And then the answer is, well, yes, they are. We do have some Shakespeare. We do have some. But then when you look at it, it's just little excerpts here and there. So the answer looks very convincing until you go deeper. And so I think the answer lies in the parents have to do their homework. They have to get involved. And we live in a very busy time. And people want to trust educators. And here I said earlier, I would love that parents would trust us as educators. But in this case, I think parents do need to question what is happening. We cannot let our kids be guinea pigs. And I shudder to think of a whole generation of children being miseducated, if you will.
Yeah, and we have certainly tried to cover some of this. We've had Michelle Malkin on this program. We've had David Barton on this program. We've had you on. This is at least the second time we've had you on the program, and oftentimes we don't get that many phone calls, and that's why I started the program today by mentioning your article, The Real Power Behind Common Core. I think some people say, well, it's not in my state, so I just won't pay any attention, or I have kids that are not in the public schools. I got them in the Christian schools, or I homeschool them, so it's not a big deal. And I wanted everybody to recognize we have a lot more at stake here. And just before we move on to classical education, I have one more call on Common Core. So let me go out to New Hampshire this time. WSEW. Jean, what was your question for us today?
I am a special education para, and I know some of our teachers at the middle school that I work at are very upset over the Common Core, but I'm just wondering, how is this going to affect working with the special education students?
Oh, that's
or does it affect them in what we teach them?
I was thinking that's a perfect setup, because we're going to talk about the way in which young people learn differently, and I'm really setting you up for that idea, because if something else, Jody, that you've done over the years, you not only take the classical Christian education there, but even when you studied Montessori and other things, you recognize that some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, special needs children have certain needs. This is really pretty much a one-size-fits-all kind of curriculum, is it not? And I think that's why special ed teachers would be especially concerned about it. True?
Right. And that's an excellent question. I personally would like to do further research on that because, as we know with special ed, my background is special ed years ago, and that is that we have to differentiate, and we have to look at how this child learns best. And I think you're right, Kerby. It does tend to just take, and if a bright child is struggling with these new math problems, and I can't imagine a child that learns differently would certainly struggle with this.
Yeah.
And so I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think that for sure this has to be addressed.
Let's see if we can. I was using that as a jump-off point to the fact that in addition to all the things that you have developed over the years in terms of classical Christian education, you more than most have been sensitive to the fact that young people learn differently. And all of us have our sweet spot, and some people are visual learners. Most teachers tend to be visual learners, so they assume their students learn that way. And you go into a typical teacher's classroom, it's full of visual things, right? But some are auditory learners, some are kinesthetic learners. Talk us through that for just a minute, because it seems to me that's something that is missing today in a lot of public education, and it's something that really needs to be applied as we educate our own children at home and as we send them off to some of these Christian schools. True?
Exactly. And children that are auditory, they learn. The information comes in, but it's almost like it's free-floating in the brain, and in order to retain it and retrieve it, they need to talk about it.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean that we let this little cherub just talk, but we understand that need to talk is a need to put that information in some little file in their brain. And so we give them appropriate opportunities, or we help guide them to learn to talk to themselves, if you will. And I see these children and their mouths are moving. They're not saying anything, but they've learned to talk to themselves. Children who need to touch, and as you said, children who need to move, but provide positive opportunities for them to move, to do this. And as children get older, I do learning portfolios, and I have 12 different learning assessments, and each year I add more to it so that we layer all these different ways that they learn, and so that children, and as they get older, then they know how they learn. For example, the Gregoric style delineator is one of my favorites, and when children know, I'm concrete sequential, I learn I need things very organized and sequential. Or I'm analytic sequential. I need to be alone in order to learn. Or I'm abstract random. I need to be with people in order to learn. Or I'm concrete random. I need to multitask in order to learn. But when you start putting that together, and I say, not every teacher is on this planet to teach you the way you learn all the time. So you have to learn to bridge to the teacher. So that as they get older, I give them techniques on how to adapt to each teacher. And likewise, I tell each teacher, you have to learn to teach these children. So we meet in the middle. But the point is that you're right. We all learn in different ways, and we do have that sweet spot.
I think one of the greatest advantages of some of the writing on multiple intelligences is it was able to tell young people who were sort of told by their school that you're not very bright, that really they're bright in another area.
Absolutely.
And there are some young people that really maybe should go into taking shop or learning welding or working with their hands because they are really very gifted at that. And yet sitting in a classroom and memorizing things, not something they do very well. And so I think these are such life-affirming kind of conclusions that have come out. And again, when I look at Common Core, a lot of what's even in the public schools, it really is a one-size-fits-all. It's a top-down. The Department of Education in Washington, D.C. is telling everybody how to do school. And frankly, I think education is different in Tupelo, Mississippi than it is in Stockton, California, and it's certainly different in Minneapolis, Minnesota than it is in Miami, Florida. It seems to me that we should not buy into some of the ideas that are being pushed down on us through the federal government and through Common Core.
Right, and they'll say that they're just standards and they can be interpreted by the district, and yet you see the way that it's presented, and again, I think that's kind of a misnomer as well.
Well, I want to take a break, but I want to get back to that trivium as well, because the whole idea of classical education.
Subjects.
So we'll cover with that very quickly, but let me again just mention for those of you that maybe just tuned in, we are talking today about two issues. Number one, kind of what's been wrong with education. We mentioned Common Core, and we already heard some comments from Tony and Jean and others, and we can certainly take another phone call if you'd like to address that issue. But rather than just talking about what's negative, we've also tried to bring some positive aspects. We've talked about kind of the different ways young people learn, We kind of talk back about really how through history, really for a millennia now, we've understood that there are certain times in which young people have certain kinds of giftedness, and to actually tailor education that emphasizes those kind of strengths and weaknesses. And if you find yourself saying, I really want to read a little bit more about this, as you go to Jody Capehart's website, she has some great citations from some of the famous books on that. Certainly you could talk about The Lost Tools of Learning by Dorothy Sayers, and of course Douglas Wilson, we mentioned just a minute ago, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, and Susan Wise Bowers, The Well-Educated Mind. Just a couple of books that certainly would help you. If you are a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, a headmaster, you need to know about some of these, and they're available at her website. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jody Capehart in studio with us for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I'll try to get to some of these phone calls, but just before we do, we mentioned the trivium, and a lot of people said, I've never heard that word before. Other listeners, of course, have heard it, but this really goes all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman thought, but all the way through the Middle Ages. We now know that young people learn differently at different ages of their life. Explain that, and you've really developed a curriculum around that, of course.
Yes, and the trivium is so beautiful, because if you look at the grammar stage, and these words are not words we use in our normal talking, and so we have to adjust, but those are the elementary years. But children are just absorbing information at such a rapid rate, and they're assembling information. So when we educate them even more critically, critically important that we take that multi-sensory approach and use the learning styles because they can learn so quickly and they can memorize and and repetition and rote learning is important at that age because they're able to do it so quickly.
Right.
So it's like we're filling the bank, and some people say, well, do we just take the, cap off their head and pour it in? No, but they are able to learn so quickly.
Yes.
And if we retain that ability, we'd all be a whole lot smarter. And then suddenly, I'd say to parents, you can always tell when your child has entered the next stage, and the nice name for it is the logic stage, but it's also called the dialectic stage, and I'll use the word dialectic now because that's when they start to debate. Debate, yes, debate, dialogue, and dispute. That very disputatious stage, and now they begin to evaluate what they were educated in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in order for them to get ownership of it, and I say, this sweet little child that accepted everything that we taught them and just looked at us and nodded and took it, now looks at us, and we were the smartest person on the planet on Tuesday, but now on Friday, they have entered this new stage, and it happened so quickly. And for parents that are first-time parents, it's very disconcerting, and because now we are the stupidest person on the planet, because they've entered the new stage, and it's very healthy. They need to debate, dialogue, and dispute. They've got to get ownership of it.
Right.
And so that's when we teach a course in logic.
Yes.
Because we want to train the brain to debate in a very logical, systematic way. And it's beautiful. And so it's healthy for them to go through that because the ultimate aim of education is the rhetoric, which is high school, an ability, don't think of it as political rhetoric, but an ability to articulate. And an ability, a refinement. And now you've got this information, you've questioned it, but now you've put it together, but you communicate it in a very intelligent manner. And so these three stages are very, very important. And that's in essence the overarching, the trivium. And then within that, as you said, there's all the learning styles for each of these ages. And so, for example, when kids get to that logic stage, you don't want to have them be doing worksheets and say facts and write down the answers. I mean, that's a time to really, that's when they need to do critical thinking. So when they have the Common Core, is very antithetical to this model.
Yes.
Because they're having them do these critical thinking activities and these word problems at a stage when the brain isn't ready for it.
Yeah, and we have a whole generation of teachers that have never heard of the trivium and certainly have never heard of the learning modalities and all of the other stages. And so as a result, they're just saying, well, I just teach. And of course, then they'll teach out of their own experience, but maybe out of their own learning style. And so as a result, that is the case. And then when this is being forced down from the federal government through various carrot and stick kind of things, and you have the Common Core, this is why I think it's important to come back to some of these things that we have known for centuries. That work. And I remember years ago, one time I had a chance to interview Bill Bennett when he was the Secretary of Education. He wrote a book called What Works. And I remember doing the interview, and of course, even more recently, Cal Thomas has a book called What Works. And we know what works, and when people turn their back on what works, they are really setting the next generation up for failure. So that's why we wanted to do this program today.
Right.
Let's take a few more phone calls real quickly and see if we can just answer a question or maybe get some of your perspective on this. We'll go to South Carolina this time. KJRT. Charles, I think you've been a teacher, so I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, a teacher and even a principal of a charter school. And I'm here amening just about everything you're saying, Jody. Only one thing that I have to ask you about. When I was teaching in the government schools in D.C., which are absolutely worst probably in the world, just about everything that they suggested we do turned out to be completely counterproductive. Every initiative was just evil. And one of the things, however, that they insisted we do was teach to all three learning styles. As I found that when I tried doing that, I could only teach 1/3 as much material because I had to teach everything 3 different times. And to do is just teach 1/3 as much, which means especially in math, which is my area, kids could not see the connections. They couldn't see that the math had to be true. They learned to take the book's word for stuff, the teacher's word for stuff, the system's word for stuff. It undermined, and I think it was intentional, it undermined and I can actually prove this by asking 4 simple questions of just about any math student that's been taught with the current curricula. And it taught them to postmodernism in terms of absolute truth.
Yes.
And when they don't have a concept of absolute truth, they can't believe in God, which I think is the overall intent. I found, and I had great success eventually, that you have to realize that these kids are not going to get jobs where their boss is going to present some stuff to them visually, auditorily, and hands-on. They have to learn all three ways. I did that. I never had a kid. I would be in schools where all my kids passed the final exams and nobody else's kids did.
Wow.
And so I have a great problem with the idea of adapting to a kid's learning style. I think you should make the kids adapt and learn to learn all three different ways.
And I agree with you. I'm really glad that you brought this up because I'm sure it's clarifying it for a lot of people. I'm talking about when they're little and they're learning through all of their modalities. And I've been teaching for over 40 years, and you present the material visually and you talk about it, obviously. And there are some that just whiz through it and they do it and they're done. And there's no sense in having them do a hands-on thing because it's ridiculous. And then you see some that look at you with the deer in the headlights. That's a child who may need to go back. They didn't get what you were doing with borrowing and carrying or whatever. But once they do it, bingo, they've got it. That's what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that you have to take time to do all three with the whole class. It's for the child that may need that extra in those foundational years. But I'm 100% agreeing with you that our job is to teach them, and that's what I do, is to teach them the skills of how to bridge to the teacher's teaching style. Because you're right. I say you're going to go work in a world that you are going to have to adjust. And one of the big skills that you have to have is to adjust. But in those foundational years when they're learning volumes of information, that's when I think it's important that we teach with their learning style. And I've written a lot of books on this, and I would love to share some with you, and I'd love to dialogue with you about this because I think it's a fascinating topic, and I'm so glad you brought it up.
I might just mention your website, jodycapehart.com. We have a link there, and of course you are called the School Whisperer and serves as a consultant on education issues. And if some people are in the midst of starting a Christian school, as you have been doing for so many decades now, 4 decades, isn't that amazing? Certainly they can learn some of the lessons from you, and certainly by going to your website. Also, of course, I've just mentioned a few of the numerous books that you have written, and really encourage people to find out a little bit more. So it's just been great for you to come in today, talk about Common Core, which is the problem, but most importantly, talk about the way to teach so that we really can have the next generation to learn. So thanks so very much for the testimony of 40 years of doing this. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's a joy.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll change topics. But let me just encourage you, if you haven't gone to our website, pointofview.net, those first 2 articles, The Real Power Behind the Common Core, The Common Sense Case Against Common Core, will be ones that you might want to benefit from. As you go to Jody Capehart's website, Why Classical Education, and some really great resources that are all available, and it's all available at our website, pointofview.net, which will then link you to her website, jodycapehart.com. Just before we take a break, I've sent out a letter to you that I would encourage you to read. And as we've talked about education today, we've also been very concerned about transgender activists, transgender education. And so both in the article that we have in the latest Outlook magazine, as well as in the letter that I sent to you, we have information about that. And most importantly, we have a link on our website here where you can find out a little bit more. And as you click on that button that says donate, that's a way in which you can support us as we address that issue. And we'll be talking about that more certainly in the coming days. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time looking back over the last 50 years. After all, we've been talking this year about the fact that we are at the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. How has that helped or hurt individuals? And we are certainly going to spend some time today talking with Jason L. Riley. No doubt you have seen him before. I love reading his byline in Wall Street Journal, and he has been on the editorial board and been part of the Wall Street Journal for 2 decades. And of course, also, you perhaps have seen him before as a commentator for the last decade or so with Fox News. And he is the author of a previous book, Let Them In. But the one we're going to talk about today, Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. We've also posted one of his commentaries, which appeared in the New York Post, Why Liberals Should Stop Trying to Help Black Americans. And we also have a video, which I would encourage you to watch, a short interview that was done with him on some of these topics. It's an opportunity for you to watch the video, then maybe hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page, and start a conversation that needs to take place. So again, one of the things we would encourage you to do as we open up the phones a little bit later is to join our conversation. But Jason Riley, always appreciated your writing and your appearance on Fox News. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me and for that very nice introduction.
Well, we just think the world of you, and I have been thrilled to know that your book has received very nice compliments from everybody from Charles Krauthammer or Thomas Sowell all the way to Juan Williams. So that's pretty high praise. And before we get into some of the specifics, because we're going to talk about minimum wage, we're going to talk about affirmative action, we're talking about stand your ground laws and everything else, it does seem to me that in some respects your book is helpful in this 50th anniversary to ask some fundamental questions, because there was a time in which really the civil rights struggles in the 1960s were appropriate, but we are 40 and 50 years past that now, and it seems to me that some of the policies that were intended to do good, as you point out in your book, have done a great deal of harm.
Exactly. We now have this decades of history and data to look at and to see what the results are of these efforts to help. And I think they were well-intentioned efforts. But well-intentioned efforts aren't enough. We have to look at what works and what doesn't, and perhaps reassess our efforts to help the black underclass. And I think what 5 decades in we should acknowledge is that there are limits to government benevolence.
Sure.
There are limits to what Washington can do beyond providing a level playing field, beyond providing equal treatment under the law. Then it's up to a group to take advantage of those opportunities. And I argue in the book that blacks have not done that by and large, or not enough of that, and that what needs to be done going forward is really less about what whites can do for blacks and more about what blacks can do for themselves.
Sure. And one of the phrases you use is one I use all the time, the difference between equality of opportunity, which many pieces of legislation provide, and then trying to get an equality of outcome. We certainly do want to remove barriers to discrimination so that everyone has an opportunity. But once you start down this road of equality of outcome, I think you're going to have the nanny state, you're going to have intrusive government, and you're really not going to end up with what your goal is in the first place.
Right. We don't see group equality and outcomes anywhere in society today. We can't find it in the past. And not only can we not find it in America, you don't see it anywhere else on the globe. So, yes, the government can focus on equal opportunity. And, there was a time when black leaders understood this. If you go back and read people like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington,
yes,
they said things like, all of these rights and privileges should be ours. And they never lived to see a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, but they were optimistic. And they said, but it is much more important that we ready ourselves as a people to take advantage of those rights and privileges once we have them. And I argue that their successors in the Civil Rights Movement have not done that. They have not done a very good job of readying blacks to take advantage of it. In fact, they've spent the past 3 or 4 decades making excuses for blacks and trying to continue to hold whites accountable for these bad outcomes that we see. And I think it's the wrong message to send.
And in the video that we are encouraging people to watch and then maybe put on their Facebook page, certainly you're asked about that, because you think of Frederick Douglass in certainly the 19th century, Booker T. Washington. They were really arguing for people, and in particular the African Americans, to be independent, to be entrepreneurial, to be self-motivated. And today there is a sense in which some people wonder if the goal, at least some leaders that have now been kind of taking on the mantle of the civil rights movement, are really trying to create a sense of dependence on government. And that's certainly not what African Americans were speaking about at least a century ago.
No, and you do have an overdependence on government today, whether you're talking about in terms of jobs in the military, the post office, civil service jobs, or whether you're talking in terms of handouts, welfare, public benefits, and so forth. You have an overdependence on government, and then you also have a political party that has a vested interest in keeping that in place, that dependence on government in place. And I think that, by and large, is why you see so many blacks today gravitating to the Democratic Party. It's that nurturing of dependence on government that's at work there. And you also have a civil rights industry today that has a vested interest in black dependence on government, because they have a vested interest in keeping themselves relevant in the debate about black America. So they don't want to talk about what blacks have to do for themselves. They want to talk about what others can do for blacks and should be doing for blacks.
Throughout the program, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the political issues, but I thought I'd raise one of the cultural issues, which you talk about in your second chapter, and that is, even back in the 1960s, at that time, the Assistant Secretary of Labor for President Lyndon Johnson, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later became senior senator from New York, was warning that the black family was in a state of crisis. And it does seem to me, Jason Riley, that if you have more and more black men and women growing up in homes without a father, that is a very significant prescription, unfortunately, for poverty and for all sorts of social ills. Doesn't mean that there aren't successes. We've had Dr. Ben Carson on this program, grew up with a single mom, but the point is the general tendency is that those cultural issues are going to have such a dramatic and unfortunately negative impact. True?
Yes, I agree with that entirely, and I know Dr. Carson has spoken very forcefully about this issue, and we need more voices out there saying these types of things, which is one reason I wrote the book. Bill Cosby was saying this stuff 10 years ago, and he got his head handed to him, particularly by those on the black left who don't want to talk about this. They want to talk about white racism. And but you're right. The absence of fathers in the home, that's the root cause, in my opinion, of a lot of these bad outcomes. And it's not just my opinion. There's a lot of social science to back that up. All these bad outcomes associated with absent fathers, whether you're talking about teen pregnancy, involvement with the criminal justice system, drug dependency, school dropout rates, you can just go down the list. And the social scientists have attributed it to the absence of fathers in the home. And one of the central messages of the book is that a black man in the White House is all well and good, but it can't replace a black man in the home.
Right. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of those political issues. I might just mention this is almost a 200-page book and almost 20 pages of endnotes. So if you find yourself saying, oh, well, I want to look that up myself, I want to research it, we certainly encourage you to do so. You can find the book in your local bookstore, but we think so highly of it. We also have it on our Point of View store, and the title of it, Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. We'll continue with Jason Riley right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Will Christianity hold up in court? Trial lawyer Mark Lanier answers that question in his book, Christianity on Trial, A Lawyer Examines the Christian Faith. He has 3 decades of experience as a lawyer, but also has college training in biblical languages. In the book, he brings his biblical expertise and his legal background to bear on some of the foundational apologetic questions concerning Christianity. He makes an opening statement similar to one that he would make in a court of law. He argues that we, the jury, should use our common sense in evaluating the statements of the witnesses and the claims of the experts. He also reminds us that we are evaluating evidence like we would in a courtroom. What is the evidence for the proposition? What is the evidence against it? He then takes us through many of the fundamental questions believers and skeptics have about the Christian faith. In each case, he calls witnesses to address those questions. For the existence of a God or no God, he calls to the stand such luminaries as G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis. In order to explain the biblical view of God, we hear from the psalmist, St. Paul, and John the Apostle. He also addresses 2 important issues in our world today, truth and morality. We unfortunately live in a postmodern world that denies the existence of absolute truth. That is why he calls witnesses like Plato, Descartes, St. Paul, Anselm of Canterbury, and Augustine. We also live in a world that is full of moral relativism. That is why he also writes about right and wrong and the moral God, and his witnesses here include Charles Darwin, Herbert Spencer, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Adolf Hitler. He concludes with the resurrection. Lawyers like Frank Morrison, who wrote the book Who Moved the Stone, have found the evidence for the resurrection to be compelling when examined in the same way they examine evidence in a courtroom. If you know a lawyer who is skeptical about Christianity, this might be a book you could pass on to him or her. They will find that the claims of Christianity can indeed hold up in court. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Jason L. Riley. His book is entitled Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. It is published by Encounter Books. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we also have it available on our Point of View store, and I think you would really benefit from it. We also have his piece that he wrote in the New York Post, Why Liberals Should Stop Trying to Help Black Americans, as well as a video that I would encourage you to watch. It only takes about 4 or 5 minutes, and then maybe hit that share button, put it on your Facebook page. You'll generate all sorts of conversation, and it's a conversation we need to have on the 50th anniversary of some of these civil rights pieces of legislation. And let's, if we can, get into what you feel were some of the worst. And I've seen some of the interviews you've done, Jason, and certainly at the bottom of the list, or the one that certainly has had such a devastating impact, especially for black teenagers, is the minimum wage law. I mean, done for all the right reasons, if you will, wanting to help those people that are actually working to have a living wage, but the impact that that has on those who would like to get a job has been devastating, is that not?
It has, though I would say that I don't ascribe racial motives to the people who are pushing for minimum wage increases today. But I cannot say the same about the people who originated this legislation back in the 30s and 40s.
Yes.
If you go back and read the congressional record at that time, you'll see that one of the reasons minimum wage laws were passed to begin with was to, in fact, price blacks out of the labor force.
That's true.
Blacks were moving out of the South in large numbers, and unions did not want the competition for work. And that was one of the reasons they convinced lawmakers to put these into place. Now, again, I'm not saying people who support minimum wage laws today have a race-based motive, but the effect of these laws is the same. They continue to price blacks disproportionately out of the labor force, because when you make it more expensive to hire someone, fewer people get hired, and that's particularly true among younger, less experienced workers, majority of whom, or a disproportionate number of whom, happen to be black.
Well, and let's, whether it's black or white, recognize what that has done. I'm old enough around the table to remember a time when you had many more people in a grocery store that would bag your groceries, that when you would go to a, quote, service station, now we just go to a gas station, there'd be people to put gas in your car and wash your windshields and things of that nature. And a lot of those were pretty close to what you might call minimum wage. When I think... Right. Really, Jason, of some of the jobs I had at first, I've worked in a machine shop, I've been a janitor, I've laid pipeline. I mean, if today the minimum wage it was as high back then as it is now, I'm not sure my labor was worth that much to my employers, and I had an opportunity to reach my hand on the lowest rung of the ladder and then climb up it. So whether
That's
you're
right.
black or white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever, we have eliminated opportunities for all young people who, frankly, might not bring a lot of skills other than maybe a willing attitude to the workplace. So it is certainly...
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Not only are you preventing people from getting on that first rung of the socioeconomic ladder, learning these job skills, developing their human capital, learning how to show up on time, take direction, and also the pride of earning that paycheck, working for yourself, but also keeping kids out of, off the streets, out of trouble, keeping them busy, preventing the sort of idleness that leads to a lot of bad outcomes as well. But today, the law, the minimum wage law, is sold as an anti-poverty program. And that's what I take issue with in the book, because when you look at poor households in America, what you normally find are no workers, not workers who are earning the minimum wage. So you can't confuse minimum wage earners with poor households. Many of the people earning the minimum wage are teenagers living in the suburbs, their moms staying busy while the kids are in school, their senior citizens staying busy in retirement. Those groups combined are the bulk of minimum wage earners. What poor households need are workers, and to the extent that you are depressing the number of jobs available with minimum wage laws, you are not helping to address poverty.
One of the things we're talking about is this idea of minimum wage. You have a whole chapter 4, on mandating unemployment. And the original goal, at least, once you got past the racial one, was to actually address the issue of poverty. But it has become less and less effective, as you pointed out just a minute ago, as an anti-poverty tool. But on the other hand, Jason, it seems like it's become a political football, because the minimum wage has been raised whether you have Republican administrations or Democratic administrations. But lately, this president's been using this as sort of a way to beat Republicans over the head in this off-year election, wouldn't you think?
He certainly has, and that's part of the income gap stuff, the sort of class warfare rhetoric that we've had from decades. Out of the left, when they don't have anything else to talk about, they generally fall back on these arguments. But you think about it, why would unions be so interested in what the minimum wage is? Their members make some multiple of the minimum wage, so why would they care? And of course, the answer is they are still trying to prevent competition. They want to reduce the number of workers in the workforce in order to increase the price of labor, the amount that people who already have jobs can earn. So they're doing this because they're looking out for their members. But Obama does it and claims he's looking out for blacks, even though blacks are disproportionately harmed by these laws. And you see this across a spectrum of issues, the distinction between what the black elites and liberal elites push for and the needs of the people they claim to represent. Here in New York, where I live, Walmart has been trying to build a store in a depressed neighborhood for years. And the black left decided with the unions, who don't like Walmart because Walmart won't organize and they don't want the store built. So you have high unemployment in this neighborhood where Walmart would build a store. They need the jobs. They need the low-priced goods and services. But the unions would rather these people stay unemployed than work at Walmart.
And it's just
and
incredible.
You have black elites siding with the unions.
Well, we've talked about the disconnect between black leadership and the black underclass, and your book just gives such good examples of it. And I've felt many times that African Americans have not been well served by some of their leadership, and there's just one more example. I might as well open up the phones. The phones are already ringing, 1-800-351-1212. But I know that when asked what are some of the most devastating policies. Certainly one that we just mentioned was minimum wage, but the other one down at the bottom of the list, the one that also you think is very devastating, is in Chapter 5, Educational Freedom. And that is when you have educational policies that consign young people, poor people, into poor schools and failing schools. This is another thing that has really devastated the African American population, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And here again, as you said, this huge disconnect between the wants, needs of the black poor and the agenda of their supposed leaders. You look at school choice and polling, it polls off the charts among blacks,
yes,
and particularly black parents. Yet you have the NAACPs, the Al Sharptons, the Jesse Jacksons siding with the people defending the status quo, namely the teachers' unions. You cannot defend these policies on educational grounds, last in, first out hiring of teachers, or giving a teacher a job for life, tenure after a couple of years in the classroom, making her next to impossible to fire. You can't, there's no educational justification for that. That doesn't help the kids. That's a job protection.
Yes.
That's about the adults in the system. But then this debate goes way back. If you go back to the busing debates of the 70s and 80s,
yes,
where the black leadership wanted to put these kids on buses and ship them an hour away to school. Black parents wanted their kids to attend school down the street. They wanted the good schools built right in the neighborhoods. The elites wanted the kids on buses, but the elites' kids weren't on those buses.
Of course.
And so you have to, and so when people talk about viewpoints among blacks, what they're generally talking about is who the media runs to speak on behalf of blacks, namely Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, the NAACP. But there are diverse opinions within the black community, and I wanted to give voice to some of those opinions with this book. It's one of the reasons I wrote it.
Well, again, this chapter on educational freedom is so powerful, and I was reminded of that as I was reading through your book. On the documentary, I'm sure you've probably seen it, Waiting for Superman. And this was, again, about those few that are waiting to maybe get a lottery pick so that they can take their children out of a failed school. And one is in the District of Columbia and some other places. You can go all around the country and illustrate that. And it was such a sad movie because you realize they were depending on a lottery pick maybe to give their child a chance. And when you realize that there have been so many various administrations, whether it's the president in the District of Columbia, whether it's been governors in various states, that have tried to kill school choice. And you know that parents in these districts that recognize that the failed school across the street is never going to provide their children with an opportunity to succeed. It's just a sad commentary. And again, as you point out, what a disconnect between the leadership and the underclass.
And it's especially sad because we know school choice works. We know school vouchers produce better academic outcomes. We know charter schools produce better academic outcomes. And what's sad is that what gets wrapped into this debate are things that aren't really relevant. I mean, we know school choice works. The opponents aren't really quibbling with that. They pretend to be quibbling with it, but they're not really quibbling with it. What they're quibbling with are the adults in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not public education should be a jobs program.
Wow.
That's where the real quibble is. In New York City, there's a huge debate over charter schools, and we talk about whether, do they cream kids? Are we comparing apples and apples? That's not the real debate. If the charter school community in New York decided to organize its labor force, all of the opposition would go away tomorrow.
Wow. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some phone calls. But we haven't even covered affirmative action. What about voter ID laws and stand your ground laws? Certainly a lot more that is from this book. Please stop helping us. How liberals make it harder for blacks to succeed. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Jason L. Riley. His book is entitled Please Stop Helping Us. It's published by Encounter Books. Look for it in your local bookstore. But we also have it available in our Point of View store today. We have an article that he has written for the New York Post that you can also download. We also have a video that you might want to watch and put on your Facebook page or your blog. So we've given you some ways to really educate others about some of those issues. And before we get back to the book, let's take a phone call or two. So we'll go to Georgia first. Tony, thank you for calling today.
Appreciate you taking my call again, Kerby. Again, like I said, African Americans, we are responsible. We should take responsibility for a lot of things that, and I watch Josh. I see him on Hannity a lot, and I deeply appreciate, how he just, flat out just telling them, when it comes down to when Jesse and Al and those people are just hijacking the black community when it comes to what we should believe in, basically, and where we stand as a community, and to have them as speaker for us. I mean, it's just. I mean, I'm just shocked. And like I said, I've got to get his book. I've definitely got to get his book, for sure.
Well, I would think that you would then say that Jason Riley speaks more for you than some of the supposed leaders that say they speak for you. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Exactly. Him, Ben Carson, as well as Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
And just like he said.
Thomas
when
Sowell, Walter Williams, some of those people? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, good. Jason, any comments?
Well, it's good to hear voices like that, and I'd like the book to resonate with folks like that. I think it's important. And Bill Cosby was on to something, as you mentioned before. Tom Sowell and Shelby Steele and Walter Williams, they've been saying it for decades as well. The cultural barriers are the main barriers to black progress these days. Jesse Jackson's been trying to. He's been out complaining of late that Silicon Valley isn't hiring enough blacks, as if Apple's hiring practices have something to do with black kids in Chicago shooting one another.
Yeah,
I mean what is the priority here?
And see, everything is seen through the lens of race. One of the things that you mentioned in your piece in the New York Post was where you quote from Clarence Thomas, also African American, and he points out that I was the first black kid in Savannah, Georgia, which, by the way, is one of the radio stations that carries this program, and many others that went to a white school. So here he's the first black kid in a white school, but he said rarely did the issue of race come up. He says if today we apply those same standards, we'd be talking about it all the time. And there is a time to address the race issue. Certainly agree with that. But when you see everything through the race lens, and I think your Silicon Valley example is a perfect example of us saying this is not because of racism. It's because we are going to hire the best programmers and best engineers. And if they so happen to be the right color, fine. But if they don't, we're in the business to make money, and we're not in the business to discriminate against people because we are competing with others who are also making decisions about who are the individuals that are going to advance that particular company.
He's absolutely right, and it's also how we discuss race in this country. I mean, if you go back to leaders like King, they said blacks have to do for themselves, despite the racism out there today. Jesse and Al have the opposite view. Blacks can't be expected to do for themselves until we have vanquished racism from America. So they scour America looking for the Cliven Bundys and the Donald Sterlings and going, there you go.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me about black self-help while we still have people like that out there holding us back. It's nonsense. Blacks achieved so much when there was so much more racism. If you look at the outcomes in employment, black labor participation rates, declining black poverty back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. You see much, much better outcomes back then than you do today, and I would argue it's because the black family was in much better shape back then than today.
I would certainly agree with that, too, and that's your cultural chapter. We'll get to affirmative action in just a minute. Let me take another phone call real quickly here, and we'll go from Georgia on one side of the coast to California on the other, KYCC. Chris, what would you like to say today?
Yeah, I heard you were talking about the voter ID thing.
We can get to that next, sure.
It's interesting because I just had a discussion with, I have a liberal friend that on Facebook, and we chat back and forth about that topic. And he's saying it's discriminating against people. And I basically gave him a list of if you don't have an ID, that means you've never had a driver's license, had a job, been on an airplane, had a library card, stayed in a hotel, have a bank account, had a credit card. I'm like, how's that discriminating to ask for an ID to vote when you need one, to get a library card or go to, your local video store and rent a movie? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I made this long list of all the things that you need photo ID for, and it's a pretty long list, including some things I wouldn't recommend people do, for example, buying liquor and all sorts of things. But it seems to me, Jason, let me come to that topic, because it's one I know you've addressed as well, this idea that voter ID is by its very nature discriminatory, even racist at its nature.
Well, one big problem that the left has is that a majority of blacks in this country support voter ID laws. An absolute majority of blacks, according to a number of polls going back several years, show that blacks support voter ID laws. So do most whites. So do most Democrats, most Republicans. Support for voter ID in this country is wide and deep. And that is a huge problem for the left trying to argue that it is some form of oppression. The other problem that they have when they say that Republicans are pushing this to suppress the black vote is that black voter turnout, the black voter turnout rate in 2012 exceeded the white voter turnout rate, even in those states with the toughest ID laws in the country. If Republicans are suppressing the black vote, where is the evidence?
It's just gone the other direction. And I have used some examples from our listeners in Georgia and other places where that was implemented. Of course, it's been implemented in so many states now. You even have a fair number of African-American legislators in various states are the ones actually pushing it. So, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to maintain in its face. But
this debate is about, debate right now is a political debate, and it's about Democrats being concerned about voter turnout in November, particularly among minorities, and they're trying to scare them to the polls. And I think it's shameful that someone like Eric Holder would take to national television to say these sorts of things, to divide us along racial lines for partisan gain. I mean, we were talking about culture earlier. Imagine if Eric Holder used his prominence, used his microphone in front of the national stage to tell black men to pull up their pants and take care of their children and finish school. Imagine that coming from the nation's top law enforcement officer, telling them, stay out of trouble with the law. The system isn't stacked against you. Change your behavior. Imagine if instead he uses it to divide us racially. I find it incredibly irresponsible. I understand he has a political agenda, and that's what this is about, but I still feel it's a shameful use of that microphone he has.
We should expect more from an attorney general, and certainly I think of some of the individuals that have served as attorney generals in the past that would never even think about something like that. But let's take one more phone call and we'll get back to your book. Mary in California, I think you wanted to make a comment, so go for it.
Yes, I think that one thing that is most important now regarding elections is voter fraud, and that not only affects blacks, it affects everybody. Voter ID, I guess Al Sharpton and company want to protect the poor. Most of the poor, if they're on welfare, they have to have ID to be on any kind of welfare. So that demolishes that argument right there. Then there are 26 states that had their votes transferred to Spain to be counted. Experts say that those votes cannot be verified or validated. And I think that is the biggest danger to anybody's vote, black, white, or any color in between. And I think that blacks have to stop thinking black all the time. They have to think nationwide, worldwide, because just about, we'll take blacks, they've been eclipsed by Hispanics. Hispanics outnumber blacks now. The next step, they'll outnumber whites. So blacks have to think in terms of overall, someday they may be like the native North Americans, a very small minority of this country. So what are they going to do then? about this situation.
We need to take a break, and when we come back, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, but also get into affirmative action. A very good book that I might commend to you of individual used to work at Wall Street Journal, now writes with the National Review, and that is John Fund on stealing elections. And I always get such a kick out of some of those precincts, that one in Michigan that time that had 116% voter turnout. Boy, what a patriotic bunch they were. And you obviously see the need for us to maybe look at our voter rolls and talk about voter ID. But we'll come back, and Jason Riley with me for a little bit longer. We just do need to cover at least Chapter 6 on affirmative discrimination is the title of that particular chapter. And we'll cover that and give a few more of you a chance to join your conversation if you'd like to do so. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jason Riley with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. And in your chapter on affirmative action, this is a place where I think some people might say, well, you guys are maybe not being honest because you say you believe in equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome. So affirmative action should provide an equality of opportunity. How do you respond to someone that might say something like that?
Well, there are a number of problems with affirmative action. You can say violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. You can say it's racially divisive or just divisive in general to be favoring some groups but not others. The argument I make in the book, however, in addition to those, is that it's just not working. Yes. It's not helping the intended beneficiaries. This was a program sold as an effort to help the black poor rise into the middle class and increase the number of black college graduates. But if you look, at the trends in place prior to affirmative action policies, which took effect in the 1970s, if you look at the rate of blacks entering the professions, the skilled professions, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then you look at what went on in the 80s and 90s, they were entering at a faster rate prior to affirmative action.
Isn't that amazing?
And on the education front, if you look at what California did back in 1996 when it banned racial preferences in higher education, what happened after that ban took place is that black college graduation rates rose by more than 50%, including in the more difficult disciplines of math and science, again, by more than 50%. So as a result of affirmative action policies, we had fewer black doctors and lawyers and engineers than we otherwise would have had.
Amazing. You know, one of the people that we've had on this program is Stuart Taylor. When we talked about his book, Mismatch, How Affirmative Action Hurts Students, you quote it once or twice in the book, and it just seems to me that you don't necessarily have to take your word for it. There are empirical studies that say that if that is your goal, and we can raise questions about whether that should be a goal based on equal protection and whether or not helping students now who've never faced those kind of racial Jim Crow laws that their grandparents faced, for example, is fair. But if you just concede everything, the point is it's not working. And that's why I think that book Mismatch, which you quote in your book, just illustrates again that it's just not what you need if indeed you are convinced that you want to help the underclass.
Why would it ever have worked? Think about this. You have black kids graduating from high school reading at an 8th grade level. You have black kids reading, watching twice as much television and reading half as many books.
Yeah.
You have black kids scoring 200-300 points behind the white kids on the SAT test. Are we going to make all of this up freshman year in college? Was that ever plausible?
Not plausible, and that's why I think that book makes a case.
You're going to set these kids up to fail. A great example of this is MIT, a study done of MIT some years back, where you had black kids at MIT who scored in the top 10% on the math section of the SAT scores of all kids in the country. Some very smart black kids, but they were in the bottom 10% of SAT math scores among kids at MIT. So you had these very smart black kids who would have been hitting it out of the park at a less selective school, but they were getting funneled into MIT, where they were dropping out or switching majors and so forth, because MIT didn't care about graduation rates as much as it cared about the racial makeup of its campus, making it look like America, diversity, a color-coded college catalog, and all the rest. Whether the black kids were actually graduating was a secondary concern at best.
Yeah, very good point. Let's take just one more phone call. We're just a little tight on time, but we'll see if we got time to go to Missouri this time. KNEO. Eric, you're on with Jason Riley.
Thank you very much, Kerby. Love your program. Love you. Thank you very much for having this gentleman on. Jason, the book sounds great. I've got to get it. And, I would just offer an alternative title, Please Stop Hurting Us, with a subtitle, With Friends Like You, Who Needs Enemies?
I like that.
Because the fact of the matter is, the rhetoric that is put out there as to what's being done by individuals, in the race-baiting community is not what it's really all about. Go back to LBJ. Let's go back to 50 years ago. Now, Jason, you could, and Kerby, please tell me, this is what's been reported to me, is that whenever LBJ, first of all, he was a racist, and that whenever he passed this civil rights legislation, he said that now we'll have, and he used the N-words, vote forever. I do not think for a moment that the white liberal elitists from the Northeast care one whit about black, white, or anybody else. All they care about is a dependency, creating a dependency class. I believe the black community were the guinea pigs, so to speak, and now they would like to put us all in the dependency class as they have done with the black community. And so I think that there's been a lot of journalistic malpractice because the stated purpose and the real intention of these individuals within the civil rights movement I mean, it's been two different things. You know, just one last thing. Look at Dr. King. I'm sure all three of us here have a great respect for Dr. King. Let's go listen to a speech now, be inspired. But what did he say? He said that he dreamed of the day when his children were not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But that mission, that goal has been bastardized, and it's just the opposite is what our president and others in the ruling class are trying to cram down our throats. So thank you. Those are my comments, and I'll hang up and listen. God bless you both, and I can't wait to get that book.
Yeah, well, I think I've been hijacked by some of the leadership there, and Jason, we've talked about that before, but any comments? Because we've talked about Frederick Douglass, we've talked about Booker T. Washington, and of course he mentioned Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to use our sort of modern-day sensibilities to pass judgment on folks like LBJ and their ultimate intent back then. I give them the benefit of the doubt in the book, and I think many liberals today do mean well. I mean, I don't think that what's driving these policies of affirmative action or voter ID laws or even something like the anti-poverty programs that I say are doing more harm than good. I don't think that they have a negative intentions regarding blacks. I don't think there's a racial animus there by and large. I mean, I know plenty of liberals, black and white, who I think mean well. I just wish they would reevaluate their efforts to help because it's so clear to me after 50 years of Great Society programs that this current approach is not working. It's just not working, and in many cases, it's doing more harm than good. So I'd like to, and I argue that it's doing more harm than good because there are limits to what government and politicians in Washington can do, other than providing a level playing field. There's just so much that the government can do, and it needs to acknowledge its limitations. We need a more humble approach, and then we need to focus on things like black culture and the antisocial behavior that is dominating the black ghettos today. That is the real barrier. That's what needs to be addressed. Too few people want to talk about it, but if we don't want to talk about it, how are we ever going to address it?
Well, I'm glad we could talk about it today, and if we're not going to reevaluate it on the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, or next year the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, when are we going to do so? And so that's why I think your book is so helpful, and it's so well written, and of course we've always enjoyed reading your byline and watching you on Fox News, so continue all the work you're doing at Wall Street Journal and through Fox News, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Many thanks. Many thanks to you.
We will take a break, and tomorrow we'll get back into some other important issues. But if you just joined us, this was Jason L. Riley. The book is entitled Please Stop Helping Us, How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed. It is published by Encounter Books, and that's a way in which you can certainly look for it in your local bookstore. I do believe it deserves more prominence and to be featured, and I hope it will show up in your local bookstore. But if it does not, let me encourage you to get a copy. We have it available through our Point of View store. We also have a very good and well-written piece that he put in the New York Post that kind of summarizes a little of that, so you can get that down for free. Just go to the articles section. And most importantly, I posted a video. We like to do that from time to time, and you can watch an interview with him briefly as he covers a few of these points very quickly. And then you might want to click on that and maybe put it on your Facebook page. Just hit the share button and maybe send it to somebody, and that is certainly going to generate a conversation. That's what we're about here on Point of View. I want to thank certainly Catherine and Andrew and Chris for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program.
Point of View is produced by